Hello, everybody. I don't really have a plan for this. I think I'm just gonna start at the top and work my way down. And then once we get done with this bookcase, I have a second one that we're gonna do. There is my helper. That is Miss Lunabelle. She's probably gonna yowl most of the time. So feel free to give a comment or ask any questions you might have. And I'll give everybody just a couple of minutes to make sure that everybody that's here wants to be. So, oh, well, hi Kelly. Good to see you here. We're gonna have a lot of books to go through. Okay. So while we are waiting, I'll show you my jar of moon water. I did this during the lunar eclipse, the last full moon. I actually have more moon water, but that was my extra. So I suppose we can probably go ahead and get started. Other people can kind of jump in as they're able to. So we're going to start right up at the top up here. So, hi Marshall, glad you're here. So, I'm going to move a few of these down so I can reach them a little bit easier. I don't think I'm going to pull every single one out, but I'll go over all the titles and how familiar I am with them, what the subject is. I'll get that out of the way. That's for painting. Okay, one sec. I should have been a little more prepared for this. Okay, so first off, we have the Element Encyclopedia of 5,000 Spells. And honestly, that book, if you can get a hold of it, it is amazing. It doesn't go a whole lot into like how to move energy and things like that, but it'll give you the bare bones of a whole lot of spell work. You can add your own personal touches to it, and it's a really, really great book, actually. Then we also have the Element Encyclopedia of the Psychic World there. I haven't really gone a whole lot through this one, but if you're interested in like mediumship, psychics, things like that, there's a lot of good information in here. I've also got the Element Encyclopedia of 20,000 Dreams. If you're interested in dream work, that's another great one. A new Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. I have not gotten into this yet. I don't know a whole lot about the Masons. I know that there is a lot of information out there in their whole society. So I actually own a building that used to be a Freemason hall, so I'm kind of interested in finding out what they were all about. So that is on my to-read list. If anyone ever works with singing bowls, there's a Singing Bowls, A Practical Handbook by Eve Rudy Jansen. And there's some good information about singing bowls in there. They are great for ritual. I've actually used them a lot in ritual. It's almost like ringing a bell. It's a signal that it's time to change consciousness. The Tree of Life, I haven't really got into this one yet. So, I can't really tell you much on that one. I've got Working Conjure by Sen Moise. I've actually done a lot of studying of hoodoo workings over the last year, and if you're interested in that, Working Conjure, the author is Sen Moise. It's a really useful book. Crossroads of Conjure, that one, it's another hoodoo book. I have not read that one yet. Weave the Liminal. That one is Laura Tempest Zakroff, who wrote that. I have a couple of her books. That one is a newer purchase. It's on my to-read list. I've met Laura a few times, and she is a pretty awesome person, and I expect the book to be really good. Haitian Voodoo. This is another one on my to-read list. The title is kind of self-explanatory. Altars Made Easy. The last name is Streep on that one. I'm not sure what the first name is offhand, but that one, of course, is all about making your own personal altars. It has a lot of great ideas. So that may be one if you want to do all kinds of stuff with altars to consider. The Crafted Cup. The author is Shadwin, and that, I believe, is a Celtic-based path. I know in the back of the book, they actually say that to practice what's in the book, they want you to actually join their tradition. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I have not joined their tradition, but there's still a lot to be learned from the book. I have a book here called The Runes by Horik Svensson, and it's about runes. I have several rune books, and they're all kind of similar, but there's good information in each one of them. There's a book on cats hiding in there, because of course we love our cats. I have The Green Witch Herbal, and that is by Barbara Griggs, and there's a lot of great herbal information in that. I haven't used it a whole lot, but it's definitely worth checking out. I want to do a lot more with it. Dream Song of the Eagle, that was a gift to me by a friend, and it's like a native storybook. We have The Celtic Tradition by Caitlin Matthews, and it just goes over a lot of elements of Celtic culture and different things that they've done over the years. So that was pretty cool. This one here, this is Goddess Communion, Rituals and Meditations. This one is by Selena Fox, who I've worked with Selena quite a bit. I'm a volunteer with Circle Sanctuary, and pretty much anything that she writes or puts out there is worthwhile reading or watching. So lots of good information in there. If I don't believe this would be available on Amazon. This would have to be purchased through Circle Sanctuary if you were going to buy it. So now going into the actual shelves, let's see, I've got the 1999, the 2000, the 2002, and the 2004 Llewellyn's Magical Almanacs. Obviously the astrological and date information is way out of date on those, but they also have a lot of articles, and those articles cover a really wide variety of topics, and they're really enjoyable to read. A lot of different authors. If you can get back issue copies of any of the years, really, they're well worth having. I have here, it's a copy of Margaret Adler's Drawing Down the Moon, and this one is a classic. It talks about, it's older. I want to say it was from the 70s or 80s. I can't remember the dates offhand. But she talks about all different types of paganism, and I know there's interviews, and it's been quite a few years since I've read it, but there is a plethora of information in there, and it's a pretty cool book. Now going back to the hoodoo stuff that I've been studying, I've got the Voodoo Hoodoo Spellbook. Alvarado is the last name of the author, And this is one that it was highly recommended to me. I have not read it yet, but hopefully soon. So now we're getting into, there's a great big section of Ted Andrews books. We have How to Meet and Work with Spirit Guides, How to Uncover Your Past Lives, Psychic Protection, Enchantment of the Fairy Realm, that's a fun one. The Art of Shape-Shifting. Animal Speak is probably one of his best known books. And if you work with like totems or animal energies, animal spirits, animal guides, anything like that, I would highly recommend this one. Animal Wise, that's basically the sequel to that one. And it has further information, more different types of animals. Nature Speak, it goes into more nature-based stuff, like beyond animals. Like, I believe there's like, plants, things like that in there. Then we get into Northern Mysteries and Magic by Freya Aswin. This used to be called Leaves of Grass. It was republished as Northern Mysteries and Magic. And if you are interested in learning about like Asatru or the runes, Odinism, anything like that, it is a really, really great book for that kind of thing. The next two books I have here, this is going to take a while, I think. The next two books that I have here, Staubs and Ditchwater, A Friendly and Useful Introduction to Hill Folks Hoodoo, and Asphodity and Madstones, A Further Ramble Through Hill Folks Hoodoo. Now, this is actually not really hoodoo. I mean, it kind of is, but the author is Byron Ballard, and she is a trip. I've actually hung out with her before, and these are not your typical pagan spirituality books, but they're almost like reading a diary in places. But yeah, you can really pick out some interesting information and interesting practices out of there. So the next one I have, and this is on my to-read list, I have not read it yet, is The Secret Country of Yourself. It's by Jenya Beachy. I met her at Paganicon last year, and I feel kind of guilty because I have not read this book yet. So it's on my to-be read list. I think there's a lot of meditations, things like that in there. Then we have Witchcraft on a Shoestring. I believe that's Deborah Blake that wrote that. That is basically for a lot of suggestions on how to practice witchcraft while not having a lot of money. And I've read through it. There's some really useful information in there. Next up, we got Magic for Beginners. J.H. Brennan. And that is not specifically pagan-based. It's more like almost just magic-based. It's definitely worth a read. I mean, it's not your typical pagan spirituality book by any means. So now we're going to get into Buckland. And I've got a whole crap ton of Buckland. So, first one is The Magic of Chantomatics. And this is one of his older ones. And even though it's got an absolutely horrible title, the first half of the book is pretty good. I mean, it's typical, like a lot of books written in the 70s and 60s. There's a lot of trying to sell the book, even after the book's already sold, which I don't quite understand, but a lot of testimonials in it. The first half of the book actually has some really useful chants and information in it. The second half kind of delves into a lot of nonsense, unpronounceable words in the chants. So it's worth picking up if you can get it used. I probably wouldn't spend the money on it new. Wicca for One, that's also Buckland. That's Pretty self-explanatory. A lot of good information if you're practicing solitary. Practical color magic. Practical candle burning rituals. I have the sequel to that one floating around here somewhere. We'll get to that at some point. Then we have The Tree, the complete book of sex and witchcraft. Now, if you wanted to practice an actual tradition and didn't know where to start, you could actually take this book and have a complete tradition to practice with just that book. I mean, I wouldn't recommend using just that, but it's a bare bones starter. It's another one that's older. I think it was published in the 70s, but it makes for some really interesting reading. Gypsy Witchcraft and Magic. This is one that I only skimmed through it. Have not read it yet. It looks like there's a lot of interesting stuff. I know Buckland had Romani ancestry, so it should be hopefully fairly accurate. So then we have Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft. This one, a lot of people call it jokingly Uncle Bucky's Big Blue Book. There's a lot of great information in there. Again, it's a little bit older book. I wish it would have been revised because the history section in the first chapter is not accurate at all. The rest of the book is great, but yeah, ignore the history lesson in the beginning because it's based on Margaret Murray's research, which was proven inaccurate later on. So yeah, but the rest of the book is great. I highly recommend it. Buckland's Book of Spirit Communications. This is another one. I've read part of it. I have not finished it. It'd be great for anybody that's studying mediumship, or wants to talk to spirit guides, anything like that. Z Budapest, Grandmother Moon. That's one that, the only reason I bought this one is because I got it for like $5 on sale used. From what I understand, Z Budapest, she did a lot of good for witchcraft in general back in the day, but recently she has turned into a bit of a TERF, which I don't know if I need to explain that term or not, so I better explain it. So a TERF is a trans-excluding radical feminist. So the people that are considered TERFs are not trans, they're not friendly towards transgender people. And as I consider myself a trans ally, I can't really recommend any of her books. Like I said, if you can get it used, yeah, but I wouldn't recommend actually supporting her by buying it new at this point. Egyptian Magic. This I tried to get through. It was kind of a tough read, so I kind of gave up on it. It was very, very dry reading, but if you're interested in Egyptian stuff, maybe give it a go. I've got a couple here by Laurie Cabot. We got Power of the Witch and The Witch in Every Woman. Laurie Cabot's a pretty classic author, so definitely check those out if you get the opportunity. Ancient Ways, that's by the Campanellis, and that covers a lot of stuff about the Wheel of the Year, like the holidays in paganism and witchcraft, ways to celebrate them. I think there's rituals for each Sabbath in there. So it's a good one. So let me slide this out a little bit. Okay, this was Star Cassis, or Cassis, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, Old Style Conjure. It's another hoodoo book, and I did read all the way through this one. Actually, I think I read this whole thing in one night, and lots of great information there. I've got quite a few by DJ Conway. We got Dancing with Dragons, it's working with dragon energies. Moon Magic, self-explanatory. Maiden Mother Crone, again, pretty self-explanatory. And then coming down here, I know the light's not the greatest. Flying Without a Broom. That one is also by DJ Conway. That's Astral Projection. The Mysterious Magical Cat. Again, pretty self-explanatory. Celtic Magic. This is one everybody seems to have had that one back in the day. It's not necessarily Celtic. They use Celtic deity names. It's basically like generic paganism, but it's a decent starter book. I can't really say anything bad about it that way. Then we have a little book of candle magic and a little book of pendulum magic. Both of those are by DJ Conway also. Again, self-explanatory. The pendulum magic, I used that one when I did a class. I taught a class on pendulums. If anybody ever wants me to do a live stream or a class or video, whatever, on pendulums, let me know in the comments. I may put a video together for that. So we have Evolutionary Witchcraft. This is by T. Thorne Coyle. This is focused on the fairy tradition. It's very in-depth, a lot of meditations, a lot of work in this book. But if you go through all the work, it's going to be well worth it. So then we have the Book of Seance. The author's last name is Cowan. Pretty self-explanatory. Then we have High Priestess, The Life and Times of Patricia Crowther, and it's written by her. It's an autobiography. She was a well-known witch back, I think, in the 60s. Full Contact Magic. That is written by, I think you pronounce it Kukulane, and it's basically a Wicca primer. The author, I know, was a police officer, and some of that kind of comes into his writing. But it's a pretty good book. It's a basic starter book. So now we're going to get into Cunningham, and some of these books are ones that I would recommend to pretty much anybody just starting out. So I have one here. It's actually 3 books in one. It's Wicca, A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner, the sequel, Living Wicca, and the complete book of Incense, Oils, and Brews. And all 3 of those, whether you get it in the edition like I have here with all 3 of them together, or if you buy them separate, they are all 3 really awesome books, especially the first one, Wicca. That's a great starter book for anybody. Then these are also Cunningham here. We have Earth Power, and then Earth, Air, Fire, and Water. And they focus mainly on elemental magic. So if you like working with the elements, or want to learn more about the elements, those would be good ones to go with. If you enjoy working with herbs, we have Cunningham's Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs. And then we also have Cunningham's Encyclopedia of Crystal, Gem, and Metal Magic. Again, I highly recommend both of those. Cunningham also did Dreaming the Divine, and it's pretty self-explanatory, working with dreams. Now here's a fun one. This is The Magical Household. Scott Cunningham and I believe it's David Harrington co-wrote this book, and the whole thing is about cool things you can do to bring magic into your everyday life and into your household. It's super cool. I love this book. Then we have Spellcrafts. That's kind of a similar one to the Magical Household, with a little bit more focus on actual spell work. Again, I'd recommend anything by Cunningham. Then we have Cunningham's Magical Sampler. After he died, I believe it was in 93. I might be wrong on the year. Someone put together some collected works that had been like individual articles and publications, things like that, and put it together in this magical sampler. So there's a lot of work in that of his that you're going to find that you won't be able to find elsewhere. So that's pretty cool. Then moving on, we have Witchcrafting by Phyllis Curott. I think this is the one. I actually have another book of hers too, and it's missing. But one of the books talks about how she gets into witchcraft, and the other one talks about more of the how-to stuff. And I think this is the more how-to one. But from what I remember of reading her, she was a pretty good author. I enjoyed her books. Francesca de Grandis. I have 2 books of hers. We have Be a Goddess, and then Goddess Initiation. My poor Goddess Initiation book kind of got chewed up by a puppy years ago. Both of these are essentially 1-year classes for her version of the fairy tradition, and they both are slightly different. They're kind of set up in a similar manner. Like, you have assignments that you have to complete, and when you're done, you're supposed to basically be changed for life, be a better person. I know it sounds kind of hokey, but she actually does a lot of good stuff in those books, so I would recommend them if you can get a hold of them. Then we're going to get into Ellen Dugan. I have a few of her books. With the Garden Witchery one, that's self-explanatory. And then I met her a couple of years ago, and she did some workshops out at Circle Sanctuary, and so I picked up a couple of these books then. But we got Practical Prosperity Magic and Practical Protection Magic, and she's very good at explaining what she does, so I would highly recommend her books. She also wrote Herb Magic for Beginners, again, pretty self-explanatory. Then moving on, I have Crystal Medicine. The last name of the author is Elspeth, and just different ways to work with crystals. Then we're going to get into, I've got a whole bunch of books by the Ferrars. And the first one is What Witches Do. This is a pretty old one, and it talks about what witches do. A Witch's Bible. If you're only going to read one book by the Ferrars, Janet and Stewart, that's the one that I would recommend. It goes over all the Sabbats, like all kinds of rituals. It is based on group work. It's actually based on British traditional witchcraft. So even if that's not your tradition, it's really awesome to read through and kind of see where the British traditional witches are coming from. It's great background. Then we have a book also by the Ferrars, The Witch's Goddess, The Witch's God, self-explanatory. The Healing Craft, so all kinds of healing stuff in that one. And then they have another one that they co-wrote with Gavin Bone, The Pagan Path. Then, okay, these two here are fun. So these are by Ed Fitch, A Grimoire of Shadows. This is actually a complete system that you could use to get started if you wanted. And then Magical Rites from the Crystal Well. Now, the Crystal Well was a magazine that was published, I want to say, back in the 60s, and this is a whole bunch of articles that were compiled from the Crystal Well magazine, and there is some super cool stuff in there. I really enjoyed reading that book. I think it's out of print, but if you can get a copy of it, it's well worth it. So then we're going to get into some Dion Fortune here. Now, she was not necessarily what I would call a witch, but she was definitely an occultist. Her books, The Sea Priestess and Moon Magic, are actually novels, but I would still highly recommend that you read them, even, like, especially The Sea Priestess, because she does talk a lot about magic. And I mean, she wrote these like way back early in the 1900s, so attitudes and everything were completely different then. So there's some stuff that would be questionable if it was put in a book now, but you know, not necessarily politically correct, but for the time it was really progressive. So I would recommend those. She also wrote Psychic Self-Defense. Pretty self-explanatory. It's a good one if you can get your hands on it. So I'm going to move down to the next shelf. I got to boot the kitty off my chair so I can drop down lower. So this is kind of fun. I'm going to pull this out so y'all can see the cover. So this is Color a Magic Spell by Helga Hedgewalker with Estelle Daniels. And this is a witchy coloring book. And your coloring book is actually a spell. Like, there's an example of one of the ones that you can color. A spell for overcoming. I had a friend pick that up for me when they were at Paganicon a couple of years ago. And it's super cool. So then also I've got the book for medicine cards here, which is an oracle deck. No, medicine cards, I actually don't have my medicine cards anymore. They somehow poofed or got destroyed. I'm not exactly sure which. I still have the book. At some point I would love to get another deck because they were one of my favorite oracle decks to work with. Your Crystal Code by Teresa Mori. This one is all about working with different crystals in a more personalized sense. It's kind of different from your normal crystal book. So if you're really into crystals, I would say give it a go. If crystals aren't your thing, I probably wouldn't bother with it. Then we've got Sacred Smoke, The Ancient Art of Smudging for Modern Times. That is by Harvest McCampbell, I believe is the name. So if you want to learn more about smudging, that would be a good one. This one here is a particular favorite of mine, Mixing Essential Oils for Magic. I believe the name is Sandra Kynes. She doesn't actually give very many, like, mixes. What she does is she teaches you how to craft your own mixes. And there's a lot of really, really great information about essential oils in there. So if oils are your thing, definitely try this book. The next one I have here is Pagan Prayer Beads, John Michael Greer and Claire Vaughan. That is more of a crafty type book. Like, if you're, like, say if you're Catholic and you pray the rosary, this is like how to make the pagan equivalent of a rosary. So it's something different. If you're crafty, you may really enjoy that. And we have Gaiamancy, and that is by Maureen L. Bell. It's actually Gaiamancy, Creating Harmonious Environments. I know there's some feng shui stuff in there. There's some other information in there along similar lines. It's interesting stuff. It's more or less if you want to do some stuff to improve the energies in your home. It's interesting. Okay, so I almost missed it. We have one more by Dion Fortune. This one here is a classic, the Mystical Kabbalah. I think I'm saying that right. But the Kabbalah is an ancient Jewish magical system, and there's a lot of pagan stuff that is actually based on the Kabbalah these days. So it gives a good perspective on, where some of those things came from. So we have Gavin and Yvonne Frost, The Witch's Book of Magical Ritual. And that one I actually just got recently. I got it used. I've heard a lot of mixed stuff on the Frosts. Being as I have not read the book yet, I'm not exactly sure where I stand on their writing as of yet. So we will see when I read it. So I've got two books here, Trancing the Witch's Wheel and Magical Meditations, by Yasmin Gilnorn. The Magical Meditations is actually a reprint of Trancing the Witch's Wheel. My poor Magical Meditations was eaten by a puppy, and so I decided to replace it, but since there are different editions, I just kept both. Maybe someday I'll replace the Magical Meditations. But yeah, there's a whole ton of guided meditations, whichever edition, in that book. So if meditation's your thing, give it a go. You'll really enjoy it. Then we have Witchcraft Today, and this is by Gerald Gardner. And if you don't know who Gerald Gardner is, he is actually the first person that publicly brought witchcraft out into the open. I believe it was in around 1950 or so. He started publishing books about witchcraft, and it kind of took off from there. He started initiating people into what's now the British traditional witchcraft. And, if you're into witchcraft at all, Gardner is a pretty fascinating character to research about. He's a big part of our history as witches, so definitely familiarize yourself with Gerald Gardner. Next one we have here is Santeria, the Religion. Now, I do not practice Santeria. I do have a crystal ball, however. Haha, see what I did there? But I do enjoy studying comparative religions, so that's why that's there. One of these days I will work my way through that. A Witch Alone by Marion Green. 13 Moons to Master Natural Magic. That is, again, another book for people that are working solitary. It's been a long time since I've read it, but I believe it was a lesson every month for 13 moons. And then by the time you were done with it, you were considered fully trained. It's an older book, a lot of good information. So I've got a few books here by Raven Grimassi. The Wiccan Mysteries. This was one of my first books, like back in the late 90s, back in the day, and I read this book over and over and over again, because I didn't have a whole lot of other books. I'm not sure how accurate it actually is, but there's a lot of information in there that's well worth going over. Wiccan magic, same kind of thing. Italian witchcraft. Raven Grimassi, he actually just passed away recently, but he was of Italian descent, so he worked a lot with Strega traditions, and so this kind of goes into some of that. He also did Hereditary Witchcraft, a book on that, which kind of ties into the Strega traditions. I mean, there's other hereditary witches besides the Strega witches, but I think this goes into a bunch of different kinds of them. So then we have, it's Rosemary Ellen Guiley, and it is the Encyclopedia of Witches and Witchcraft. And when it says encyclopedia, it means encyclopedia. Everything's categorized into little entries. Pretty much anything or any person that you want to look up, you can find their entry in the book and see what she has to say about them. Then we have Whispers of the Moon, and that is David Harrington and DeTracy Regula. And that is basically an autobiography of Scott Cunningham. If you're interested in finding out more about Scott's history, I would recommend it. Then we have by Judy Harrow, Wicca Covens. So if you're interested in group work, there's a lot of good information about, how to form a coven, how to run a coven, how to troubleshoot, all kinds of different stuff. It's a good one if you're interested in working with groups. Then we have Christopaganism, which in and of itself, it is kind of controversial. Some people claim that if you're a Christian, you can't be pagan, and vice versa. I don't get in the middle of those debates. Again, I am interested in studying comparative religion, so that's why I bought this. Also, River Higginbotham and his wife Joyce wrote this book. I'm actually a friend of River's. I have not met his wife Joyce, and he's a very good writer, so I actually learned a lot by reading that book. I know they actually have a book about like regular paganism, and I don't have a copy of that book yet, but from what I understand, it is highly recommended to people that are looking to get started out. So then we have Long Lost Friend, and I'm trying to remember the author's name, by John George Holman. Now, this was written way back in the 1800s. Obviously, this is a newer edition, and half the book is in German. There's the English translation and there's the German translation. It talks about Pennsylvania Dutch magic, and there's a lot of folk magic and stuff that's based on the Pennsylvania Dutch magic. If you're interested in history of magic and like some of the real old-timey spells and things that would have been used, it's well worth reading. It is pretty strongly Christian based. But if you can deal with that, it's well worth the read. Then we have True Magic by Amber Kay. It's another great starter book. Covencraft, that is also by Amber Kay. And this is similar to the Wicca Covens one, where it goes over, how to form and run a coven. Again, great for group work. Then I have a book by Dorothy Kelly called Tarot Card Combinations. It's a different way of reading tarot cards. If you're into tarot, I would definitely give it a try. It was really helpful for me when I was learning how to read tarot. Definitely give it a try if you can find the book. Then we have another book on the runes. This one's by Bernard King. Pretty self-explanatory. Then this one here, Ritual Facilitation. This is by Shauna Ora Knight. I met Shauna at PaganaCon about 1.5 years ago, and I was planning to do my first public ritual to facilitate it, and I asked her what she would recommend doing, and she handed me this book. So I read it through cover to cover, and if you are interested in doing any type of leadership roles, or facilitating rituals of any kind, I definitely recommend it. She's got a couple of different books along those lines, and she's a great author for that kind of thing. She really makes you stop and think about what you're doing and why you're doing it. This one here is by Sybil Leek. She was another witch that was pretty well known back in the 60s and 70s. It's called The Complete Art of Witchcraft. It's more of an autobiography than anything, but if you're interested in how things were back in those days, then give it a read. It was interesting. So then, moving on. This one here is a classic. This is, I believe it's Charles Leland. Let me double check on it. Yeah, Charles Leland. And that is Aradia, Gospel of the Witches. This one is really significant because it was written in the late 1800s. Supposedly he was in Italy researching occult matters, and he claims to have met a young woman who sat him down and taught him about witchcraft, and this is what she taught him. If you've ever heard the Charge of the Goddess, which is a really beautiful piece of liturgy that's really common in Wicca and witchcraft, the very original version of it was printed in this book in the late 1800s. Just for the historical aspect. I don't know about the accuracy of it. I don't think anybody knows how accurate this is. But just for the historical aspect, if you can get your hands on it, read it. Actually, I think there's free copies of it online for that matter. So, yeah, definitely give it a try. Got a few books here by Lupa. We have Skin Spirits, DIY Totemism, Plant and Fungus Totems, Fang and Fur, Blood and Bone, New Paths to Animal Totems, and Nature Spirituality from the Ground Up. Now, Lupa, she is a person that she doesn't believe in deities. She works more directly with earth energies without turning them into deities. And so she's got a lot of information about, working with animals, working directly with nature. She's a great author, a great person. Then we have The Celtic Way of Seeing, and this is by Frank McGowan. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I actually have not read this one, so I can't really give you any information about that. Transformative Witchcraft, that's by Jason Mankey. This is a step above your normal Witchcraft 101 books. It kind of goes into greater depth about a lot of the different rituals and stuff that are common in witchcraft. Jason does a really, really good job of explaining that. So I would recommend it if you're wanting to kind of go deeper with certain things. And then I've got a couple here by Elaine McCoy, Celtic Myth and Magic, and then the Sabbats. The Celtic Myth and Magic, it goes into a lot of the old Celtic myths and, how to work with them spiritually, magically. It's an interesting book. The Sabbats, it's pretty self-explanatory. It goes over all the 8 Sabbats, how to celebrate them, different things that you can do during those times. It's a decent book. Then, moving up here, we have Using Your Chakras by Ruth White. This is not your typical chakra book. It doesn't just list the chakras and say, this stands for this stands for this. It actually gets you into using them, which, hence the name, I guess. But it was a really different take on the chakras. I really enjoyed it. So I have to talk about this book a little bit here. Now, this is Temple Sonnets by Nathan Smith. And as you can tell, I have a lot of pages marked. This is not technically a pagan book at all. What it is a poetry book, but it's based around the seasons, spring, summer, fall, winter, and they're very, very nature-based. And that book, even though it's not specifically pagan, it has actually become a really large part of my path, and it's probably one of my favorite books to work with. So if you can find a copy of it, give them a try, especially if you like poetry. Okay, then we're back to another Buckland book. We have Advanced Candle Magic. This is kind of a continuation of the practical candle burning rituals that we talked about earlier. It goes into more depth. It talks about how to make things more complicated, I guess. More personalized would be a better way of saying it. But yeah, if you're interested in candle magic, both of those books are great. So I am going to get down on the floor here because we're going down to the next shelf. Oh my gosh, I hope this thing isn't like 3 hours long. I've already been going for like 50 minutes. I'm so sorry. So we have, it's called Love is in the Air, a kaleidoscope of crystals, and the author is Melody. And I think this book is out of print, but it is probably one of the best crystal books that I have come across. I'm still adjusting here. The meanings and explanations of each crystal, are super useful. So yeah, if you can get your hands on the book, definitely grab it. I've got another book on runes here. This one, Melville is the last name. I think it's more of an illustrated book. But again, it goes over the runes, their meanings. I have a bunch of books here by Dorothy Morrison. We have Everyday Magic, ways of working magic into your everyday life, basically. Some great information there. The Craft Companion. The Craft is a basic 101 primer. It's a good one. I would recommend it. She focuses a lot on working with tools and cleansing, consecrating, all of the basics that you want to know to get your feet under you. The Craft Companion is more of a journal. There's spells in there, and then there's blank journal pages. So if you want it for journaling, great. If you're looking for a whole lot more information, I wouldn't bother with that one. Another one by Dorothy Morrison is Utterly Wicked. Curses, hexes, and other unsavory notions. It's actually a great book. It talks about ethically cursing, if you can imagine such a thing. It also talks about how to work with graveyards, things like that. It's definitely worth the read. I really enjoyed it. Excuse me. Then we have Bud, Blossom, and Leaf. It's a good herbal and gardening one, also by Dorothy Morrison. In Praise of the Crone, that's also Dorothy Morrison. A lot of us witches are getting older, so if you're getting close to that crone stage, it might be a good one to read. Everyday Moon Magic. That is working every day with the phases of the moon, ways to bring that into your life. It's a good one. So these two here are fun. We have the Modern Witches Spellbook and the Modern Witches Spellbook 2. And it's another Morrison. I'm trying to remember her first name. Sarah Liddon Morrison. And these are older books, and they don't necessarily follow ethics very closely, but there is some pretty useful stuff in there. Take what works for you, leave the rest. So then we're getting into Anne Mora. Now, I have mixed feelings on Anne Mora. Some of her books are absolutely awesome, like the Green Witchcraft series. I have Green Witchcraft, Green Witchcraft 2, Green Witchcraft 3, Tarot for the Green Witch, Grimoire for the Green Witch. They're all awesome books. If you get into Witchcraft and Alternative Path, that's basically a 101 primer. This book, I have to say, is horrible. I do not recommend it to anyone. She basically takes her own theories on the history of witchcraft, and she presents them as fact, and quite honestly, it's way out there. I keep this book around so that way I can recommend people against it. But any of her other stuff, like I said, especially the Green Witchcraft series and the Grimoire for the Green Witch, I do highly recommend those. Hi, Jen. Glad to have you here. Then moving on, we have Power Spellcraft for Life. And I'm trying to see the author here. Erin Murphy Hiscock is the author on that one. And if you're looking for ways to bring more oomph to your spell work and, you know, how to improve it, it's a really good book. I really enjoyed it. Then we have Sun Lore by O'Hara. Basically, a lot of different ways of working with the sun and, you know, different mythology, things like that. Then How to Communicate with Spirits. Owens is the author on that one. Again, a good one if you're working with mediumship or anything similar. Lady Passion and DeVay, I don't know how to pronounce that last name, but The Goodly Spellbook. This one was highly recommended. I haven't read the whole thing, but I've read chunks of it, and it's basically a large collection of spells. And like with any spell book, I would say, you know, use what you can. Don't worry about the rest. And if you are taking spells out of a book and working with them, make sure you add something or change something to make it your own. You want to personalize your spells. They're going to be a lot more effective if you do that. Reincarnation by Paulson and Paulson. That one's pretty self-explanatory. Now we have a couple of books here by Christopher Penczak. The Inner Temple of Witchcraft, The Outer Temple of Witchcraft. I just read these like a year or so ago, and I was actually super impressed. It was the first time I'd ever read any of his books. And he really goes in depth and really focuses on giving people that are getting started a firm foundation. You know, they're really solid books. I would highly recommend them. So now we're getting into Silver Ravenwolf, which she's kind of a controversial author. I can't talk today. Some people love her, some people hate her. Some of her stuff I did really enjoy. Some stuff I wasn't so crazy about. One thing with Silver Ravenwolf that you have to watch is her history is kind of iffy. So I wouldn't take any history stuff that she writes too seriously. And then some of her definitions, especially in the To Write a Silver Broomstick book, she gives a whole list of definitions, and some of them don't make a lot of sense. Where Silver Ravenwolf really kind of shines is with her spell work and like how to work with energy, how to work with magic. And for that kind of thing, I'd highly recommend her. So the books that I have of hers, these ones I just got recently. There's Silver Spells for Prosperity, Silver Spells for Protection. So I can't say a whole lot about those ones yet because I haven't read them. Solitary Witch, Lisa just did a review of that one earlier today, which I would highly recommend you watch if you want to know more about that book. Mind Light is kind of a weird one. It gets into like her theories on quantum physics and how they affect magic. I don't know what to think of that one. American Folk Magic. That is another book that gets into Pennsylvania Dutch magic. And, you know, again, like I said, watch her history because I don't know how accurate it is. But the magic part is pretty well spot on. I would recommend reading it for that reason alone. It was an enjoyable read. If you work with angels, she has Angels, Companions in Magic. if you work with angels, it's a good one. If not, don't worry about that one. Halloween, that goes into a lot of different activities and practices for Samhain, which most people know as Halloween. It's the witch's new year, and it's a time when the veil between the worlds is considered very thin, so it's a great time for spirit communication. She goes into all that kind of stuff in the Halloween book. So these are the books here that most people know of hers. There's To Ride a Silver Broomstick, To Stir a Magic Cauldron, and To Light a Sacred Flame. If you focus on the spell work in those books, they're well worth reading. Again, like I said, just kind of take the history and stuff with a grain of salt. So we're getting down on the bottom shelf here. We have tarot spells, and that's by Janina Renee. And if you enjoy working with tarot and enjoy doing spell work, I can't recommend that one enough. It's a really great book. It's really informative, and it goes into totally new ways to work with both tarot and spells. We have The Enchanted Candle by Lady Rhea. And that one is another candle magic book. I believe it goes into a lot of detail about making your own candles and, you know, how to use them in spell work. It's a fun one. We have West Country Wicca, which is by I'm trying to read the name. Rhiannon Riali. I read that one years ago, and it seems to me like it's kind of a fractured tradition book. There's some great information in it, but it's not complete. If you have a family, the Pagan Family, by, I cannot pronounce this name to save my life, so I'm just going to show it up close here. Ciaswer Seraph? I can't say it. But if you have kids and you want to raise your kids pagan, there is all kinds of awesome activities and, you know, cool stuff to do to, like, in the process of raising your kids as baby witches. So the next two books I have here, these are kind of controversial also. I know it's getting kind of dark down here. These are both by Lady Sheba. There's the Book of Shadows by Lady Sheba, and also the Grimoire of Lady Sheba. And the reason these are controversial is she was a Gardnerian witch, which is one of the very first witchcraft traditions in the in the 50s and even earlier, on into the 60s, and she was trained in that tradition. A lot of the information in that tradition is oath-bound, which means they're not supposed to talk about it. And she turned around and she published a bunch of their secret rituals. So those are super controversial because of that, because it contains oath-bound information that was never supposed to make it out into the public. But that being said, it makes for some interesting reading. So I also have some books by Starhawk here. She is very much a political activist, and a lot of her books get into that. But if you're looking for like a paganism kind of primer in witchcraft, I would recommend The Spiral Dance. There is some great information in there. There's all kinds of meditations and activities and, you know, different things you can do to build your practice. She also has Truth or Dare, Dreaming in the Dark, The 12 Wild Ones, The Earth Path. That's more nature-based stuff. But the one I would recommend most out of all of those is definitely The Spiral Dance. Fairy Wicca by Stepanich. This is book 1. I don't know a lot about this. I was told by some people that this person basically made it all up, which I don't know if that's the case or not. I have not read it yet, so I have yet to come to my own conclusions about that. Next, we have A Witch's Brew, and that is by Patricia Telesco. I've got several books of hers. A Witch's Brew, if you want to learn about like magical teas and all kinds of things like that, definitely read that one. It's got a lot of interesting stuff that's not necessarily covered in a lot of other books. She also has Advanced Wicca. If you want to practice Wicca but want to go deeper than what the 101 stuff takes you, Advanced Wicca is a good one. Exploring Candle Magic. That's also by Patricia Telesco. That's pretty self-explanatory, more candle magic stuff. We also have Your Book of Shadows by Patricia Telesco, and that is all about how to build your own personal book of shadows. So that's a fun one. Then we have Scrying for Beginners by Tyson. So scrying, that's a very specific subject. If you're interested in learning how to do scrying, you could give that book a try. The next book on the shelf here is An ABC of Witchcraft, and that's by Doreen Valiente, and she is one of those people. She's considered the grandmother of modern witchcraft. She actually worked with Gerald Gardner in a coven together, and then she went on and wrote a bunch of her own books, and this is a whole bunch of witchcraft topics, basically in alphabetical order. Then Arthur Edward Waite, I think that's his first name. The Pictorial Key to the Tarot. That's a classic if you like working with tarot. The Rider-Waite tarot deck, which I used to have, I don't have a copy of it anymore, is what this one is based on. But there's a lot of other decks that are actually based on that particular deck that this book could be used for. Then we have Aura Reading for Beginners. The author's last name is Webster. So if you want to learn about reading auras, it would be a pretty beneficial book to read. I have to readjust here. I'm sorry, my foot fell asleep. Because after these few books here, we're going to be moving on to the other bookcase, which thankfully is much smaller than this one. There's a book here called Soulmates. That's also by Webster. Pretty self-explanatory. We have Positive Magic, and that's by Marion Weinstein. That is a really enjoyable book. It gives you a pretty solid base in positive magic and how to work with it. There's also a really great section in on how to learn how to do the I Ching, which is a Chinese system of divination. And if you're interested in the I Ching, there's a great method in there to learn how to do it. I'd highly recommend it. I have a few books here by Kate West. Let me see here. We have The Real Witch's Year, which is basically a day-by-day book of different activities and things that are applicable to each day of the year. Kate West is a pretty good author. I enjoy her books. We have The Real Witch's Book of Spells and Rituals by Kate West. The Real Witch's Kitchen. If you are a kitchen witch, get that book. There's all kinds of cool stuff in there. The next two books I have are by Tess Whitehurst. We have Holistic Energy Magic, which I have not read the whole thing. I met Tess a few years back and went to a workshop, or I think I went to a couple of her workshops. And she seemed very knowledgeable. I enjoyed her workshops. I did read her Magic of Flowers book. And if you're into herbalism or flowers, anything like that, there's great information about how to work with flowers in your magical path. So I'd highly recommend that one. The next book I have here is The Crone's Book of Charms and Spells. The author's last name is Worth. It's just a lot of random spell work in that one. I've skimmed through it. I haven't read it from cover to cover. Wylent, I believe, is the name of the author on the next one. It's Wylent's Book of Incense. They go really deeply into how to make your own incenses and how to use it in ritual. So if you're crafty and you love incense, give that one a go. The next one is Hoodoo Herb and Root Magic. The Materia Magica of African American conjure Catherine Ironwood, I think is how you pronounce her last name. This book was recommended to me when I was in a workshop at Paganacon last year. It's mostly goes through the different herbs and tells you what they're used for. It was if you're gonna study hoodoo, I would say probably get that book. It's well worth it. The next one I have here is The Complete Idiot's Guide to Wicca and Witchcraft. And while the title, of course, is ridiculous, I actually read through this to review it to see if it was worth recommending to other people. And I was actually really surprised. It is actually a really, really good basic primer for learning about witchcraft. So if you're a newbie and you come across this book, pick it up. It's worth a try. The last one that I'm going to go over on this bookcase is Sigil Witchery, and that's another one by Laura Tempest Zakroff. If you like working with sigils, it's an awesome book. I'm going to say definitely get it. Laura knows her shit. I'll just put it that way. Okay. I'm going to get up off the floor, and in just a second here, we're going to go over to the other bookcase. I got to make sure my feet work. And I'm going to cover up the camera because none of you need to see my dirty house. Okay, I am headed over to the other bookcase right now. And that one is... There's a lot of stuff on there, but it's not nearly as full as the other one. So, alright, we'll start at the top here. Oh, there's my really, really cluttered one of my altars. So, we're going to start over here. We have by Barbara Brennan. I've got two books by her. There's Hands of Light and Light Emerging. Both of those are energy healing books. And so if you are a healer or wanting to learn about healing, they're good. Definitely read them. We have, I think this was a college textbook, but Magic Symbols of the World by Pearl Binder. It's more, goes into the symbolism and stuff from more of an academic perspective. We have a coffee table book about fairies, and these are in here really tight, so I'm not going to try pulling them out. But the illustrations in there are beautiful. If you enjoy fairies and like looking at fairy artwork, get that book. It's great. We have a book by Lundy called Crafts for the Spirit. There's all kinds of different spiritual craft items in there. I guess that's kind of redundant me saying that because of the title. But she has some really good projects. We got another one by Dorothy Morrison here, Magical Needlework. So, like, she's got cross stitch, she's got, like, sewing, like, magical dollies, you know, all kinds of things like that. So if you are, again, if you're into crafty stuff, it would be a good one to try. We have another craft book here called Witchy Crafts, 60 Enchanted Projects for the Creative Witch. Olick, O-L-I-C-K, is the author. Then we have Beading the Creative Spirit, Finding Your Sacred Center Through the Art of Beadwork. So more crafty stuff. This whole big part of this section here is craft stuff. We have The Artist's Way, that's kind of a classic. Then we're getting into a few other things here. We have Jonathan Cott, The Search for Om Seti. This is a book about a documented case of reincarnation. And if reincarnation is something that interests you, it's a pretty fascinating read. I definitely recommend it. We have The New Age Herbalist by Richard Mabey. A lot of good herbal information in there. We also have a book by Hutchins, A Handbook of Native American Herbs. Then we have The Essential Guide to Essential Oils, The Secret to Vibrant Health and Beauty by Robert Wilson. That's not specifically a pagan book, but there's a lot of great information about essential oils. So again, if you work with oils, give it a try. Healing with Homeopathy, The Complete Guide, Wayne B. Jonas and Jennifer Jacobs. I have not read that one yet. Then I'm going to skip over to my decks and oracle stuff here. We have the Robin Wood Tarot up top there. That is my all-time favorite for doing tarot readings with. I do the vast majority of my tarot readings with the Robin Wood Tarot. I have a deck of oracle cards, mermaids and magical mermaids and dolphins, and that's a Doreen Virtue deck. It's got some pretty cool artwork on it. I pull it out once in a while, not real often, but I do enjoy it. In the basket, there is a tarot deck. I'm not going to pull it out right now, but it's called Tarot of the Witches, and it was my very first tarot deck. The box is long gone. That's why we have it in the little wicker thing. But it's a pretty cool deck. Crow's Magic Tarot. I just got that kind of recently, so I haven't done much with it yet. The Gendron Tarot has some really amazing artwork on it. The thing that bothers me with that one is the artwork. The style changes. So while some of them are just visually stunning to see, some of the other ones, they're different, and it kind of throws my concentration. So I don't use that deck very often. Then have the Ted Andrews Nature Speak Oracle. That kind of ties in with the Nature Speak book that I showed earlier. We have the I Ching, or Book of Changes. This is the Wilhelm Baines edition, and this is a Chinese divination system. I may actually do a video about how to do the I Ching at some point. It's a really fascinating thing to do. It gives really accurate answers, actually. Got a little teeny book of Native American wisdom that was gifted to me a little while back, and there's some pretty cool stuff in there. We have Nature's Healing Oracle, using the power of plants for physical and spiritual well-being. So if you like working with plants, it's a great oracle deck. Soul cards. I actually have two sets of soul cards. There's the Soul Cards 1 and the Soul Cards 2. The Soul Cards 1 is just not up on the shelf at the moment. But they are a really unique oracle deck because there are no set definitions for any of the cards. you have to look at the images and go completely by your intuition, and I love it. It's amazing. Next we have the Sacred Circle Tarot. I don't use this one a whole lot, but it has some really strong pagan images, and it's a super cool deck. The other tarot deck here is called the Astral Tarot, and it is probably the ugliest deck I have ever seen in my life. But what's cool about it is it was published in 1969. It was a limited edition of 1,000 decks, and it was one of the first mass-produced, well, if you can call 1,000 mass-produced, but it was one of the first tarot decks that were published like that. So it was a pretty cool find. So going down to more tarot stuff, we have Raymond Buckland's Romani Tarot. This is again one that I just got recently. I really love the images on this deck. It's one I want to work more with. We have the William Blake Tarot. If you are into the poetry of William Blake, you probably really like that one. I'm going to move my little star here. We have the Shapeshifter Tarot. That's one I haven't worked with a lot yet, but again, I love the artwork on it. Legend, the Arthurian Tarot. That's another one. I'm a huge fan of the artwork. If you can't tell, I kind of have a problem with collecting tarot decks. So then, going back to books, we have The Power of Birthday Stars and Numbers, the complete personality reference guide. And this is by Safi Crawford and Geraldine Sullivan. And if you're looking for like astrology information about specific dates, it's really interesting. I've actually used it quite a bit to look up people's birthdays, and usually it's pretty spot on. This one here is similar. The Secret Language of Birthdays. It kind of does the same thing. It goes through all the dates in the month, or in the year, and gives the personality traits for those dates. Then we have The Only Astrology Book You'll Ever Read, and that's by Joanne Woolfolk. And if you want a basic beginning to astrology, it's an excellent book for that. Definitely give it a try. It's not the only astrology book you'll ever actually need, but it's definitely a great beginning. These two here I haven't really read yet. There's Astrology, A Comprehensive Guide to Classical Interpretation. The author is Burke. And Astrology and Relationships. The author is Pond. The Astrology and Relationships, I'll pull that one out every once in a while if I'm looking up specific information. And I'm just going to leave it at that. The Kabbalion, Three Initiates. This is a classic book that I know very little about. I haven't got into it yet, so we're just going to kind of skip that one. Then we have Julie Soskin, How Psychic Are You? And there's all kinds of little psychic exercises to test yourself and how to kind of flex your psychic muscle, per se. It's a really interesting book. Soul Search. This here is all by David Darling, and it's about the afterlife. This here is something that I find really cool. It's by Mason and Petrovsky are the last names of the authors, and it's about crystal grids. The book's called Crystal Grids, and that's something that I've been studying for a while. And if you like working with crystals and stones, definitely look into it. It's a way to kind of up your game with working with earth, crystal, and stone energies. We have The Meaning of Flowers by Seoble and Field. It just goes into the meanings of flowers. Journeys Out of the Body, that's Astral Projection. That's by Robert A. Monroe. I have a little aromatherapy, it keeps on sliding further back in there, a little aromatherapy pocket book. The author is Kendra Grace. So if you like working like with oils, aromatherapy, anything like that, there's some useful information in there. So back over to here, we have more crafty stuff. So we have The Crafty Witch, 101 Ideas for Every Occasion by Willow Paulson, and also Witch Crafts by Willow Paulson. And it's all kinds of witchy fun stuff you can make. And yeah, if you are a creative sort, definitely get those books. You will have lots of fun with them. Then next we have How to Make Amulets, Charms, and Talismans by Deborah Lipman and Paul Collin. I only skimmed through this one, but it looked like they went pretty in-depth on how to make those things. It's another kind of crafty type book, but you know, definitely look into it if you come across a copy. So this whole stack here, these are all copies of Circle Magazine, which is a magazine that it's no longer in print. It was published by Circle Sanctuary, and I mean, they ran it for years. There's all kinds of articles about so many different topics. Even though it's not currently in print, you can actually still get copies of the magazines. They have orders. They have stock available where you can order like back copies and stuff from it. So if you're interested, there's lots of cool information in there. So now we are down to the last shelf finally. How long have I been talking? I've been talking for an hour and a half. Wow. Sorry, this is so long. I should have broke it up, I guess. So we have Breakthrough Intuition by Rosemary Ellen Guiley. Remember, she's the one that did the complete Encyclopedia of Witchcraft also. This is another one for, working with your psychic senses and intuition. I have some books here on like native type spirituality. These are kind of controversial because some of them are information that wasn't necessarily the native people didn't necessarily want released, and some of it do some research if you look into like these books, because I don't know how accurate all the information is. But there's a Buffalo Woman Comes Singing by Brooke Medicine Eagle, and she supposedly goes into a bunch of her experiences that she had. There's Earth Medicine and the Medicine Way by Kenneth Meadows. Dancing with the Wheel by Sun Bear. That book actually reads kind of like a Witchcraft 101 primer, with changed out for native stuff. I mean, there's some useful information, if you're looking for general paganism, but I don't know that I would really consider it native. Mandalas of the World, that one's actually really cool. If you like mandalas, there's lots of cool stuff in there. We have the Medicine Wheel Garden. That one's great for gardening. The author is E. Barry Kavash, Kavasch. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Then Black Elk Speaks. This one is actually highly recommended. Black Elk was, I believe he was a Sioux or Lakota elder, and he had a vision that basically told the future, and then he wrote about he didn't write about it himself. He told the vision to another person who recorded it for him, which is where that book came about. Then I can't read, I can't even come close to pronouncing the name of this author, but it's Native Religions of North America, and it just talks about a bunch of the different spiritualities from the different tribes. Then I have a few here by Mary Summer Rain. Again, she's kind of a controversial author. You know, some of the Native people, like, basically disowned her. You know, so, you know, any of this stuff, you know, take with a grain of salt. She's got Spirit Song, Phoenix Rising, Dreamwalker, Phantoms Afoot, Earthway, Daybreak, Beyond Earthway. Those are her native spirituality ones. She claims to have done a whole bunch of time learning with an old native woman, and this is what she learned from her. So, again, take it with a grain of salt. Now, this other book of hers, this one's super cool, especially if you have kids. This is Mountains, Meadows, and Moonbeams, a child's spiritual reader. And this would be, like, if you had little children, how to get them started, like, you know, working with their psychic senses, intuition, you know, introducing them to, you know, being more open-minded like that. That's a cool book. If you have kids, I would recommend that one. Lynn Andrews' Medicine Woman, this is another one that's kind of controversial. Black Elk by Wallace Black Elk. It's another kind of controversial native one. So now we're getting into some other stuff here. We have the Cliff Notes for mythology. So I'm kind of a mythology buff. So when I found the Cliff Notes, I went ahead and I bought them. Then I have Mythology by Edith Hamilton. Parallel Myths. This is really interesting because it takes mythology from all around the world. And it kind of, you know, compares, you know, how they differ, how they're the same. It's pretty interesting. Then we have the Norse myths, and the cover on this is, like, the spine is not readable. Kevin Crossley Holland. So, if you're interested in Norse mythology, you might want to give that one a go. This one here is the Edda by Snorri Sturluson, and that is more Norse mythology. And that one was written 800 years ago, something like that. If you're interested in Norse mythology or Asatru, Norse religion, anything like that, read it. There's two different versions. There's the poetic version and there's the prose version. I believe I have the prose version here. Bullfinch's mythology, that's a classic mythology. I think pretty much anybody that is a witch or pagan should probably read that at some point. It's a great reference point. Celtic myths and legends, Celtic fables, legends, and folklore. Basically a lot of Celtic stuff in there. And just for the record, we are almost done. I have a couple books on Anamkara here. Anamkara Wisdom, and just by McKinney. And Anamkara by John O'Donohue. And Anamkara, from what I understand, is the Celtic version of angels. And so that's how to work with your Anamkara angels, basically. Then we have The Way of the Shaman by Harner. It's another somewhat controversial book, but there is really good information in there. This one here by Cho Katsui, I don't know if I'm saying that right. Advanced Pranic Healing. I have not read that. So I can't really give any feedback on that one. If you're interested in learning about Reiki, there's Essential Reiki, A Complete Guide to Ancient Healing Art, by Diane Stein. Then I've got a couple books on feng shui here. I don't really follow feng shui, but I find it interesting. Again, it comes into my comparative, practices, religions, interest. But I have Total Feng Shui by Lillian Tu. And Lillian Tu's easy to use feng shui, 168 ways to success. So, I mean, if you're interested in that kind of thing, they are good books. They're very informative. There's also another feng shui book here. It's Feng Shui Step by Step by Simmons, and it covers a lot of the same kind of things. And any of those are pretty good, I think, for learning about the practice. This is a healing book. It's called The Tapping Cure, by Temes, Temes. It's just a healing method by tapping on certain parts of the body. It's kind of interesting, and then it kind of ties in with. This is my very last book, by the way. This is Reflexology, a Basic Guide, and it is by Beryl Crane, and reflexology is another healing method. So actually, I do have one more book, and I'll pull it out. Oh, there's a moth came flying out. I hope he wasn't eating my book. So, this here, I'm not going to open it. Well, maybe I will. I have a lot of stuff in here. So this is not finished, but it is my Book of Shadows that I've been working on and off for several years. I took a big sketchbook, like, I don't know, a 9.5 by 12 sketchbook, something like that, and I've been gradually filling in information. And I mean, if you're a practicing witch, honestly, you're going to want to keep records. So I would strongly recommend you keep a Book of Shadows. So thanks everybody that popped in to watch all of this. I'm sorry I was so long-winded. Like I said, I should have broke it up. But I really enjoyed going through all of my books with you. If anybody has any questions or wants to find out more about a certain book, just put it in the comments, and I can see what people want to find out more about. So thank you all so much. I've really enjoyed this time. Merry part, blessed be. Love you all. Have a great night.